Have you ever noticed how hard it can be to really get a grasp on complex topics? Like when you're trying to understand new developments in science, medicine, or engineering, all the new information can feel overwhelming. It's like, how do the experts even begin to process it all? Well, today we're diving into a really powerful mental tool that can help us cut through the noise.
Yeah, it's something called relational reasoning.
Relational reasoning. Okay, break that down for me.
It's basically the ability to see the meaningful patterns in any kind of information. Is how our brains connect the dots.
So, it's not enough to just know a bunch of facts. You have to see how those facts relate to each other.
Exactly. And this ability is super important. I mean, whether you're a scientist trying to analyze results, a doctor making a diagnosis, or an engineer designing something complex, relational reasoning is what makes thinking and learning in those fields actually work. Researchers like Alexander, Basak, Krohn, and Dumas have all done a lot of work showing just how fundamental it is.
So, it's not just some theory, it's actually backed up by research into how these professionals think.
Right. Today's deep dive is actually based on a review of studies that look specifically at how people in science, medicine, and engineering use relational reasoning in their work.
That's cool. And the review we're talking about is the one by Dumas from 2017 in Educational Psychology Review, right?
Yep, that's the one. It's a really comprehensive look at the research in this area.
Okay, so why should our listeners care about how experts think? I mean, what's the takeaway for someone who isn't a scientist or a doctor?
Well, think about it. If we want to get better at STEM education,
Yeah.
and if we want to build a really strong scientific community, we need to learn from the best,
Okay.
right? Understanding how those experts think, how they use tools like relational reasoning, can help us all become better learners no matter what we're interested in.
Right. Okay, so let's get into the specifics. How does this relational reasoning actually work in practice? How do these experts use it in their everyday work?
So researchers like Alexander and his colleagues, they've identified four main types of relational reasoning that experts use all the time.
Okay, go on.
We've got analogy, anomaly, antinomy, and antithesis.
Whoa, hold on. Lots of antonym words there. Can we break those down one by one? I think a good analogy, like comparing the heart pumping blood to a water pump pushing water through pipes.
Exactly, you got it. It's about seeing the similarities in structure between different things.
Okay, cool. So analogy, check. What about anomaly?
Anomaly is all about noticing when something doesn't fit the expected pattern. Like imagine you're a doctor and you see a patient with a really unusual combination of symptoms. That's an anomaly that could point to something important.
Interesting. So it's like spotting the outlier, the thing that stands out.
Precisely. Now, antinomy is a bit trickier. It's about recognizing when two ideas just clash, when they can't both be true at the same time.
Oh, okay, like a paradox?
Yeah, sort of. It's more like seeing a fundamental incompatibility between two concepts.
Got it. And lastly, we have antithesis, which I guess is about opposites.
Right. It's about recognizing a direct contrast or opposition between two things.
All right, so we've got our four and words. Analogy, anomaly, antinomy, and antithesis. And these are basically like lenses that professionals use to make sense of information.
You could say that. They're like mental tools for analyzing and understanding complex situations.
So what's the main goal for our deep dive today? What are we hoping to uncover about relational reasoning?
Well, our mission is to really shed light on the thinking processes that drive high-level scientific work, especially in professionals who are already past their formal education. We want to show how these four forms of relational reasoning can help us understand the mental work of scientists, doctors, engineers, and so on.
So we're basically looking at how they use these skills in the real world, not just in textbooks.
Exactly. And we're also going to talk about the different ways researchers have studied this phenomenon. Dumas's review breaks down the research into four categories, which he calls measurement paradigms. They're labeled in vivo, in recordo, in vitro, and in silico. Sounds a little jargony, I know, but each one offers a different perspective.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So in vivo, if I remember my high school Latin, means in life, right? So are we talking about studying these professionals out in the field, like observing them in their natural habitat?
Exactly. Think of it like observing animals in the wild, but instead of animals, we're looking at scientists, doctors, and engineers as they work. It's about understanding how they reason in real time without any artificial labs set up. Kevin Dunbar, a prominent researcher, did some really groundbreaking work with molecular biologists using this approach.
Wow, so he literally went into labs and watched scientists work. What did he find out about how they used relational reasoning?
Well, one really interesting finding was that when these scientists encountered something unexpected, something that didn't fit their predictions, what we call anomalies, They'd often talk about it with their colleagues. And those discussions could actually lead to big shifts in their understanding and even the direction of their research. Dunbar also observed that the types of analogies they used changed depending on what they were trying to do. Like if they just needed to fix a piece of equipment, they'd use simple analogies based on surface level similarities. But if they were trying to explain a complex phenomenon or develop a new hypothesis, they'd use much deeper analogies focusing on the underlying relationships. What's really fascinating here is that these experienced professionals bring a huge amount of background knowledge to the table, which allows for much more sophisticated relational mappings than you'd typically see in, say, a lab experiment with students.
That makes a lot of sense. You can't really replicate years of experience in a controlled setting. Did these in vivo studies look at other fields too, like engineering or medicine?
Oh, absolutely. Chan and Shun, for example, they studied engineering design teams working on a new type of thermal printing technology. And what's interesting is they found that analogies that seemed very different on the surface, what they call far analogies, didn't actually lead to the biggest breakthroughs, which kind of challenged some previous ideas about the power of unrelated comparisons. In another study, Dumas and Schmidt looked at engineering students and found a strong link between their ability to spot contradictions, which remember we called antinomy, and the originality of the designs they came up with.
So in engineering, being able to see those conflicting ideas or requirements can actually be a good thing. It can drive innovation.
That's what the research seems to suggest. And over the medical field, Dumas and his colleagues observed a team of neurologists working in a hospital. And what they found was that the neurologists used all four forms of relational reasoning, those four "and" words we talked about, when they were diagnosing and treating patients. They noticed that anomalies, those unexpected symptoms or test results, often showed up together like in clusters.
Interesting.
And here's something I thought was particularly fascinating. Junior doctors were usually the ones to point out these anomalies, while the more senior physician tended to use analogies and antinomies more often, maybe as a way to explain their reasoning and teach the less experienced doctors on the team.
That's a really cool observation. So the level of experience might influence which types of relational reasoning are more likely to be used, or at least talked about.
Yeah, that's a key insight from the in vivo research. Now let's move on to in recordo. Any guesses what that might involve? Think about the word record.
Okay, in recordo, record. I'm guessing it involves looking at some kind of record of how these experts think, like maybe their notes or writings.
You got it. It's all about examining written documentation, like published papers, lab notebooks, even personal letters from scientists and engineers. Sometimes it also includes looking at interviews where people reflect on their past thinking processes. Obviously, memory can be a bit tricky, but in recordo studies can offer a really unique window into the reasoning of individuals who've already made huge contributions to their fields.
So it's like we get to peek into the minds of giants, right? See how they thought about problems.
Exactly. One classic example is Wertheimer's analysis of Albert Einstein's thought process when he was developing the theory of relativity. He drew on Einstein's published works, letters, and accounts from interviews. And even though Wertheimer wasn't specifically using the framework of relational reasoning, you can see all four forms at play in Einstein's thinking. Wrestling with anomalies in existing physics, recognizing contradictions between different theories, using powerful analogies to explain his groundbreaking ideas, and understanding the opposition between seemingly fixed concepts like space and time.
That's incredible. So even before we had this formal framework of relational reasoning, we can see those thought processes shaping some of the most important scientific discoveries in history.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. Another really fascinating and Ricordo study is Johnson Laird's analysis of how the Wright brothers invented the airplane. He highlighted the analogies they drew between bicycles and airplanes, especially in understanding how crucial instability was for controlled turning and how forward motion helped to maintain balance. Their competitors, who were focused on analogies to carriages and trains, completely missed those crucial connections. And it's very likely that the Wright brothers also used a lot of antithetical reasoning in their design, like with the counter-rotating propellers, and definitely had to deal with a ton of anomalies during those early test flights.
The flying bicycle analogy, that's such a great example of how connecting seemingly unrelated ideas can lead to breakthrough innovations.
For sure. And beyond these famous examples, in Ricordo research has also been used to explore the reasoning behind all sorts of scientific discoveries, like the discovery of oxygen, electromagnetism, even the theory about how the dinosaurs went extinct. Some researchers have even zoomed out and looked at how relational thinking, like using metaphors and analogies, has evolved over long periods within scientific fields.
So both in vivo and in recordo approaches give us a glimpse into real-world or historical uses of relational reasoning. Now, what about in vitro? That sounds more like something you'd see in a science lab.
Yeah, you're on the right track.
Okay.
In vitro studies are basically those classic laboratory experiments where researchers have a lot of control over the variables. They might use things like psychometric tests to measure reasoning abilities, eye tracking to see where people focus their attention, think aloud protocols where people describe their thoughts out loud, and even brain imaging techniques to see what's happening in the brain during reasoning tasks.
I imagine it's tougher to get busy professionals to come into the lab for these kinds of studies, right?
Yeah, it can definitely be a challenge to recruit them. But some studies have managed to involve professionals, especially those who are working part-time while also doing graduate studies in STEM fields. It's a way to get some insights into expert-level reasoning in a more controlled environment. For example, Dumas and Schmidt used a specific test called the Test of Relational Reasoning, or TOR, to see if it could predict how original the solutions from design engineers would be. And guess what? They found a significant link between someone's relational reasoning ability, as measured by the TOR, and the novelty of their design ideas. Again, that ability to spot contradictions, that antinomy, played a big role.
So even in a lab setting, seeing the contradictions can help engineers come up with more creative solutions. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And in vitro studies with students have also given us a lot of valuable information about how relational reasoning works on a cognitive level. Like, there's research showing that people with stronger relational reasoning abilities might have some neurological differences. And studies using eye tracking have shown us how people's gaze patterns change when they're doing analogical reasoning tasks. One study by Grossnickel and colleagues even used think aloud protocols with students and found that the hardest part for them is often the mapping phase, where they have to connect those individual similarities to the bigger picture, the overall relationship. And it seems like working memory, how much information you can hold in mind at once, plays a big part in that process.
So it's not just about seeing the pieces, it's about putting those pieces together in a way that makes sense and that takes mental effort.
Exactly. And that brings us to our final category. In silico methods. What do you think of when you hear that term?
In silico, okay, it's got silicon in it, so I'm thinking computers, simulations, artificial intelligence, that sort of thing.
You nailed it. In silico methods, use computational models and algorithms to try to simulate and study relational reasoning. While there are some really sophisticated AI models out there that can do some pretty impressive relational reasoning, when we talk about in silico and educational psychology, it often means research that uses computer-based techniques like machine learning and natural language processing to analyze large data sets of human behavior.
So it's not necessarily about building a computer that thinks like a scientist. It's more about using computers to help us understand how human scientists think.
You got it. For instance, computational models have shown us that relational reasoning often involves finding those systematic structural correspondences between different concepts. There's even a prominent model called DARA that simulates how children learn to combine simple relational structures into more complex ones as they grow. And in silico methods have been used to model the whole process of scientific discovery, showing how learners adapt and refine their reasoning strategies as they become more expert.
That's amazing. And how do those computational models help us understand relational reasoning in actual professionals?
Even though these models don't involve professionals directly, they can give us some valuable clues about the underlying mechanisms of relational reasoning that experts are probably using. For example, some researchers have used a technique called latent semantic analysis, or LSA, basically. It's a way for computers to understand the meaning of words and text, to figure out how semantically distant the concepts and analogies are. And they've actually found that this semantic distance correlates with brain activity during analogical reasoning tasks. LSA is even being used to objectively measure the originality of ideas, which, as we've discussed, is closely linked to relational reasoning abilities.
So even though it's based in computers and algorithms, this in silico research can still give us insights into the human mind and how it works.
Absolutely. And it's a great example of how different approaches can complement each other in research.
So we've covered these 4 different ways of studying relational reasoning: in vivo, in recordo, in vitro, and in silico. Now, stepping back a bit, what are some of the biggest takeaways that emerge from all this research?
Yeah, let's see. One of the key things we've learned is that relational reasoning is not just one single thing. It's a multifaceted cognitive ability that can be studied and measured in many different ways.
Right, like by observing experts in action, by analyzing their writings through lab experiments, and even through computer simulations.
Exactly. And no single method gives us the whole picture. We need to combine insights from all these different approaches to get a full understanding.
Another important takeaway is that relational reasoning is not just a bonus skill. It's absolutely essential for success in science, medicine, and engineering. We've seen evidence of that across all four measurement paradigms in different fields and at different levels of expertise.
Couldn't agree more. Whether we're talking about the groundbreaking work of Nobel Prize winners or the everyday problem solving that happens in a hospital emergency room, relational reasoning is always there, playing a crucial role. It seems to be a core part of how people think and solve problems in those scientific and technical fields.
And here's something I find really encouraging. It doesn't seem like relational reasoning is something you're just born with. The research suggests that it's a skill you can develop and improve over time.
That's right. Experts definitely get better at it with experience, and studies have shown that even specific training programs can help people enhance their relational reasoning skills.
Yeah, so it's not just about raw talent, it's about practice and learning.
Exactly. While there might be some connections to general cognitive abilities like fluid intelligence, research suggests that we can improve our relational reasoning through targeted training by building up our knowledge in specific areas, and maybe even through the natural development of our brains as we mature. Programs that focus on the individual steps involved in relational reasoning, like how to encode the elements, how to figure out the relationships, how to map those relationships across different contexts, and how to actually apply that understanding, those have been shown to be really effective.
That's good to know. And it seems like the different forms of relational reasoning, those four "and" words we talked about, don't just operate in isolation, they often work together, right?
You got it. Research shows that these different forms often show up together in conversations, and psychometric studies suggest that they're correlated with each other, which means they're related but still distinct skills. It also seems like certain tasks might rely more on one form of relational reasoning than others.
Interesting. And the last big takeaway, it seems, is that relational reasoning isn't just an individual skill, it also has a strong social component, especially when we look at the in vivo research showing how important collaboration is in those professional settings.
Oh, absolutely. Having colleagues with different perspectives and different strengths in those four and words can really boost a team's problem-solving ability. And being part of a team can actually shape and influence how individuals use relational reasoning. In many collaborative settings, it can be hard to tell where individual reasoning ends and group reasoning begins. They're all intertwined.
So, to sum it all up, relational reasoning is a fundamental skill that's measurable, teachable, and collaborative. It's a crucial part of how professionals in science, medicine, and engineering make sense of the world. And it shows up in these four main forms: analogy, anomaly, antinomy, and antithesis.
That's a perfect summary. But as with any good deep dive, we've also uncovered some intriguing unanswered questions, some areas where more research is definitely needed.
Oh, like what? What mysteries of relational reasoning are scientists still trying to unravel?
One big question is how much relational reasoning actually differs between different areas within STEM. We know it's broadly important, but the specific forms of relational reasoning, or the context where they're most crucial, might be very different between, say, theoretical physics and clinical medicine, or even within different subfields of engineering. The goals of reasoning in each field might also play a big part in how those skills are used. We need more targeted in vitro studies to really explore these potential differences.
It makes sense that a one-size-fits-all approach to understanding and teaching relational reasoning wouldn't be the most effective.
Right. Another really interesting area of research is how relational reasoning interacts with other cognitive differences, like working memory capacity and the level of prior knowledge someone has in a particular field. We know there's a connection between relational reasoning and working memory, but just training working memory doesn't always translate to better relational reasoning skills. And the exact relationship between prior knowledge and the ability to use relational reasoning effectively is still being explored. Like, do you need a strong foundation of knowledge to do sophisticated relational reasoning? Or does being good at relational reasoning help you use your existing knowledge better in new situations?
Those are some really thought-provoking questions, and they highlight how complex these cognitive skills are and how they all interact with each other.
Absolutely. And getting a deeper understanding of those interactions is key for developing better models of how experts think and for designing better educational strategies to help people develop those skills.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, the key takeaway for our listeners is this. Relational reasoning, in all its forms, isn't just some abstract academic concept. It's a real-world skill, a mental tool that experts in science, medicine, and engineering use every day to tackle complex challenges.
Think back to the examples we discussed, like the Wright brothers using analogies from bicycles to invent the airplane, or neurologists carefully spotting patterns of unusual symptoms to diagnose patients. Those examples perfectly illustrate how understanding relationships is essential for expert-level thinking.
And for anyone out there who wants to become a better learner, understanding these reasoning processes can be incredibly helpful. It can give you a pathway to become a more insightful and effective thinker in any area you're passionate about.
Here's something to consider as you continue your learning journey. Since relational reasoning is so important for experts, how can you start applying those different forms of pattern recognition in your own life? Like actively looking for similarities between things that seem different, paying attention to anything that seems out of place or unexpected, spotting contradictions or inconsistencies, and considering opposing viewpoints. Those four "and" words we've been talking about, analogy, anomaly, antinomy, and antithesis, can act as powerful lenses to help you deep dive into any new information.
And finally, remember that the science of relational reasoning is still a work in progress. There's still so much to learn about how it works in different fields and how it interacts with other cognitive abilities. It's an exciting reminder that understanding how we think and learn is a never-ending adventure.
Well said. And I hope our listeners will continue to explore and experiment with these powerful forms of reasoning in their own learning and problem solving.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us, and we'll see you next time.
See you then.